Hello, I'm Imara Jones here at the annual Bioneers conference as a special correspondent for FSTV to talk about how that movement, the Bioneers movement, can help us heal ourselves, our planet, and even our nation at this critical moment in history. And for that reason, we are honored to be joined today by Michael Abelman, who is one of the people on the planet right now responsible for why we are interested in eating organic foods on the level and at the scale that we are right now. Beginning back in the 1970s, Michael was a leader in that movement. He is now head of the Center for Arts, Ecology and Agriculture, which is on his farm in Canada, is a founder of the Soul Food Street Farms in Vancouver, Canada, and is also the author of Street Farm, Growing Jobs, Food, and Hope on the Urban Frontier. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Nice to be with you, yeah.
So I would imagine this is not your first Bioneers conference, and quite clearly you are a person who is in demand and probably has growing demands on your time given the growing interest in eating healthy and clean food. Why do you keep coming back to Bioneers every year?
Well, it's interesting. I have actually not been here for 12 years, but I was here, I think it was the first West Coast Bioneers when it was held at the Palace of Fine Arts, and for each of 2 books I was here for a plenary session, so I think the last time was 2005. So actually it's really wonderful to come back after a period of time has gone by, because it really provides me with a perspective of what has changed not only in the world but in how we're thinking about those changes, you know. I am encouraged by the amount of attention that I've heard being given to our political responsibilities, which has been really interesting here. That's different than it used to be.
What is different in the world the last time that you were here than is now that strikes you? Clearly there are lots of things that are different, but what is striking you at this moment?
Well, I think I probably don't need to remind anyone who's paying attention. If you wake up as I do and check out the news each day, your heart is broken on a daily basis. I really feel that way, and so it's not necessarily necessary to remind people that we are living in some very intense times, ecologically, socially, politically, and I think the responsibilities of individuals who have worked on raising their awareness and their consciousness, such as those who both speak at and attend Bioneers, has grown dramatically, and I think the urgency is, you can just feel it. There is an urgency, and I think that we, the thing that I really am encouraged by is that while we do have this kind of grinding negative news cycle on a daily basis. And I was talking to some young people earlier. For every incredibly negative story about climate change, about some of the political challenges, etc., there are 1 million stories of hope and possibility. And that's the part that I'm excited about. And we have to really lean into that. We really need to lean into that. We need to create those hopeful stories. We need to participate in them. We need to support the people who are promulgating them. And the amazing thing for me is that I'm in a profession that is not asking people to take much of a sacrifice. I'm just saying, here, improve the pleasure of your experience. Eat this peach, eat this carrot, and participate in a whole range of consequences that are positive. Yeah.
What is the hope for you in this moment?
Well, I think it's always for me, it's young people, you know. It's seeing I think we really are coming out of a period of comfort where we're all too comfortable. I see youth now who have accepted that they have a big challenge ahead of them, and who are coming up with the most innovative, the most creative strategies, using the arts, using music, using food and farming to really initiate change, you know. And that gives me a great deal of hope. I'm a little more concerned about the youth involvement in agriculture, because while there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, we're not yet seeing the staying power. It's just physically too demanding. People don't want to work that hard for so little, so yeah.
One of the things I would imagine that gives you hope is that during your lifetime you've seen the growth of interest in organic farming. I mean, when you started in the 1970s, it was, I'm sure, considered to be fringe. And now we have an entity like Amazon interested in taking it quite literally on an industrial scale and a global scale. Does that give you hope? Does that give you hope?
It does. I mean, it's interesting. Mark Kitchell just came out with his film, The Evolution of Organic, which is quite remarkable, which tells the story of our beginnings here in California and how California essentially informed the world movement in many respects. I should say the North American movement,
right?
Because there's been a lot of really important work going on less visibly in other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And it was fascinating for me to see that film, which I participated in, but to see and be reminded of how we began. Mm-hmm. We were a bunch of hippies, and we just knew in our core that there was something terribly wrong with how we were producing the basic nourishment that was feeding our families and our society. Not only from the perspective of its impact on personal health, but the dramatic impact that industrial agriculture was having on the land, on the broader environment, on communities, farm workers. And so none of us could possibly have imagined in our wildest dreams that this thing would have evolved and grown to the degree that it has today. And I will tell you, I was a big critic of what I call the industrialization of organic, because we did see that happen. We have seen that happen. Mm-hmm. But now my position on that has changed. I feel that we need all the different scales of production. We need everyone to be participating. We need community scale, very small scale intensive systems in our cities, in our peri-urban areas. We need small production units in the rural areas. And then we also need, people to be producing grain and fiber on a larger scale. And this thing has to be addressed on multiple levels, and we are not in a position to pass judgment on anybody who wants to get off the chemical treadmill and try to get it right. We have to support that.
So for people who may not be thinking about it, why is it important for us to eat organic, and why does that matter? Now, I know that it's a very basic question, but I continue to be stunned by the number of people who believe that organic is a tool of the elite, that it's something that is pushed upon by people who are wealthy, that it's a wealthier form of eating, and that if we want, and that we can continue to sustain ourselves with good food by not eating organic, and think that it's sort of a way to separate yourselves from other people in an elitist sort of way. I mean, that's not how you started it. And
well, I have to say, I have actually said and reflected on this that I've been farming organically for 43 years, and to be honest, for maybe 10 or 15 years into that process, I had a rather sobering revelation, and it was in fact that the majority of clean food I was producing was only accessible and only going to a fairly narrow segment of society. And that concerned me, but it also concerned many others in the movement, and we began to address that, right? Mm-hmm. Look, we had to sell our food for as much as we could sell it for in order to keep our farm operations surviving from year to year.
Right.
No farmer I know, no matter what they're selling their food for, is getting rich,
Right.
So the issue is not the cost of food, and the cost of pure food is not the problem of farmers. It's the problem of the society as a whole that has created haves and have-nots, right? The farmers we've attempted to address that. By creating urban food systems that teaching people how to grow for themselves, how to create jobs in our cities, in neighborhoods that have need, and many others by creating a lot of strategies to equalize the food system. Pure food is a birthright for everyone, And so it has to some degree been an issue. I think that, you know, I really have pushed on the idea of us going beyond just the word organic, which, you know, language gets stale. Mm-hmm. And even though we have a you know, USDA definition, for many of us, it doesn't go far enough, right? For example, it doesn't address labor issues. It doesn't address carbon sequestration or water or all these broader issues that are critical to the food system as a whole. It was a first step. Organic in itself was a first step. We were never intending to stop there.
What was your light bulb in the 70s that you were like, hang on, this isn't right?
Food is both the problem and it's the solution for so many things. You know? It was that we had lost, somehow we had come away from this idea that food is as central to our lives, rich or poor, it doesn't matter, as anything. It is critical. It's at the heart. It's the gathering point. It's a cultural, it has great cultural importance. We need it for our health. We need to be able to think clearly and act well, and you know, it's a incredible form of pleasure and a great way to get together, you know. And somehow it evolved to this thing where it was like, you know, taking your car to the gas station. You know, you fill it up as quickly as you can, you get out of there, you know.
Right.
So for many of us is, how do we rethink that? How do we put food back into the center of families and communities? How do we make it more accessible? How do we create a food production system that does not poison the land, poison the water, and poison the people who are eating the products? This is insanity, you know? And, you know, I get it. Look, you know, we came out of World War I and World War II with this incredible technology that was used to, you know, make tractors and chemical fertilizer, herbicides and pesticides, all came out of wartime technology. When fertilizers were introduced side by side with hybridized seed, it was an incredible miracle. Yields just quadrupled, pests were controlled with pesticides, and we thought we had, you know, cracked it, right? But the hidden costs were dramatic, and it took a long time. I mean, we had people like Rachel Carson, who was unbelievable, but it really has taken a long time to discover how deep a wound that created. And I'm not just talking about a physical one, you know. So many people made ill, the land made ill, entire cultures divided, communities separated. I mean, it has been a dramatic thing, and we're just coming out of that and finding a way now to use that same element, that same core element of food, to regather people together. That's a beautiful thing.
What are street farms? How is it related to or different from urban farming? And do you believe that that's a solution both to the food crisis that exists in a lot of areas and a way to bring people together, as you say?
Well, I noticed something in the early 80s, which was that supermarkets had fled most low-income neighborhoods all across the U.S. There were throngs of people without work in those same neighborhoods. And interestingly enough, in those same neighborhoods, there were just thousands of abandoned lots, right? And I thought, what I thought at the time was I had a big idea, you know. Wow. You know? I thought, well, what if we put all these things together, you know? What if we could produce fresh food and jobs on these abandoned lots in those communities? You know, when I look back at it now, I was young and naive, and you know, and I started what I called the Center for Urban Agriculture. And I can tell you, in the early 1980s, when you used the words urban and agriculture in the same sentence, people looked at you like something was wrong, you know. But we did a major project in at 103rd and Grape in Watts, next to the Jordan Downs housing project. And while that project was remarkably successful agriculturally, you know, look, if you haven't noticed, my skin is not black or brown. I don't come from Watts. And while we had good community relations and did good work in the community, I made many of the same mistakes that happen all over the world when people are trying to, to help. Thinking you know what other people need is a dangerous thing. But I still believed that we could grow jobs and food in urban neighborhoods, and that we could do it on an agricultural scale. So if you fast forward 25, 30 years, a little more wisdom, a little more groundedness, 1,200 miles north, on the downtown east side of Vancouver, the home of the term Skid Row, neighborhood that has the highest rates of intravenous drug use, highest overdose rates. We started a project about 8 years ago to really demonstrate, is it possible that urban agriculture is a viable opportunity? But more importantly, our primary mandate was a social one. It was to train and provide employment to individuals who had very few, if any, meaningful engagements in their lives. A reason to get out of bed each day, a place to go to participate in community, something meaningful to do, growing food, plants that depended on them. The results of that have been profound. We now produce 25 tons of food annually on 4 acres of pavement. These are parking lots,
How do you do that?
Well, we have an innovative box system that we've developed. And these boxes are large growing boxes that isolate the growing medium both from either contaminated soil or pavement, and also allow us to move on short notice because they have forklift tabs. And so our system is as homeless as the people we employ. But the result of providing people, of setting the table, if you will, and providing people with the land and the skills and a meaningful work environment has been incredible, And we now have people working with us that never held a job for 4 or 5 months. They've been with us for 8 years. We have people, my intention was not to get people off of drugs or save them from themselves. It was just to provide this opportunity. And yet people have cleaned up their acts. It's been amazing.
I mean, what I think is so interesting about what you said is that one of the challenges or knocks against urban agriculture is the fact that, you can't have a few boxes and your local community garden and think that you're going to feed people on a large scale. I mean, I think that's one of the things you've actually written about. But it's also, what you've just proposed is something that's radically different, right? You're not at war with the landscape. You're actually finding a way to use the landscape to grow the food, which is groundbreaking.
As a farmer who's worked professionally in more traditional field production,
right?
It was always important to me that first of all, the economics of whatever I do, wherever I do it, made sense.
Right.
Okay. It was important to me that we put the word agriculture back into urban agriculture. A lot of what people call urban agriculture is incredibly valuable, much needed, but it's horticulture more than agriculture. And that's not a value judgment. A lot of farmers I know take umbrage when they hear that word being used. I mean, we take years to learn the skills we have, So the potential for small scale, even a half an acre, to produce significant volumes of food and employ a lot of people is amazing if you have the skills to do that. Even better if you have 1 or 2 acres, I think that it's true that the illusion or the romanticism that somehow we're going to feed our cities from within our cities is ridiculous. A much more intelligent conversation is this. What is the appropriate relationship between urban farms, peri-urban farms, and rural farms? How can they be integrated? What is appropriate to grow where and when? Not this idea that urban agriculture is this isolated element in the food system and that somehow it's going to save the world, because it's not. It has to be a part of the broader system. And when we're willing to have that conversation, how are nutrients cycling back and forth? This is important, the waste from the cities going back to the farms, and what are all those relationships? This is a more intelligent conversation than saying, urban agriculture is the answer to the world's problems. It's not. We do need to address the urban food system because the majority of the world's people now live in cities. So this is important. We need urban people to understand how their food comes to them. We need them to participate in the process. We don't have as much a food crisis as we have a crisis in participation, in my view. And I think that's important, especially when it concerns food.
In the single digits of people produce the food for 90%, right? And that's a new development in human history.
This is a very significant issue. I mean, in spite of all the books and movies and talk about, the new agrarian movement and excitement around farmers markets, there is still only a tiny fraction of the population doing the work, okay? And in addition to that, a significant percentage of that tiny population is getting old, okay? And we have a national emergency. I'd say it's an international emergency that's nobody's talking about, and that is that a lot of us, like me, are in their 60s and 70s and on, and are getting ready to retire, or they're going to have to retire. And our kids are not interested. If you want your kids to farm, don't raise them on one, Really,
It was true for my family.
Yeah, it's true for a lot of families. So this is a big question, Is our society going to decide this is important enough to talk about and to do something about? Or is the only thing that's important what shows up on your little 2x2 inch screen, We got to get down to some real stuff here. So if someone wants to begin to have a relationship with their food production, but they're in a city and they haven't, this would be their entry point, what do you advise is the best way for them to start? Well, first of all, the good news is that it's 2017, and pretty much every city in America and beyond has multiple farmers markets every week in every urban area. This is fantastic. This was not the case 25 or 30 years ago, And so people can, at the very least, develop a relationship with their local market and with individuals who are growing their food. This is really important, Develop a relationship with someone. Very important start that's doing this work, okay? In addition, if you have access to a community gardening location, this is a very wonderful thing to do, especially for families. Kids need to see food growing. They need to participate in the process, Even if you have a window box or a balcony, if the possibilities now of participating in the process are so much greater than they were a very short time ago. And I think that that people need to see this as a great opportunity. There's no sacrifice here. We're not telling them to get out of their cars or anything else. We're saying increase the pleasure of your lives,
right,
and get involved.
Well, that's a great way for us to end. Thank you for sharing your deep wisdom, the hard-earned knowledge that you've learned in 4 decades, and thank you for having the courage to help us all change the way that we eat. I think the society is better off for it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And please go on the internet and find out more about Michael Abelman. He has a very robust and fantastic website with a great blog that I've read several times. Also many books and many ways to connect with the knowledge and the things that he has taught us all. And also, thank you for watching FSTV. Be sure to find out more about Bioneers as well, and we'll talk to you soon.